Okay, well, welcome everybody. Tim, I assume we are ready to go, and if we're not, I'm sure you will tell me to stop talking and interrupt me. Anyhow, my name is David Prescott. I'm your host today. Our technical advisor is Tim Griffith, and we're here to talk about what's new with pornography, presented by Cordelia Anderson, and brought to you by Neary Press. We're going to get right into it in just 1 second. I just want to put in a plug. I am not a Neary employee. I do this just because I love Neary Press and admire and adore Cordelia Anderson. And Neary Press has a long history of seeking out innovative solutions and ways of getting information out to the general public. It's a great service that they do. And over the past decade or so, a lot of amazing people have come in to have been involved in these webinars, like our close friend, the late Steve Benjis and Joan Tabachnik, Elisa Klein, who's listening in today, Kristen Lovish, who is the a coordinator behind the scenes, and of course Craig Latham, who's the executive director at Neary. And I just wanted to give those folks a shout out for all of this, and also thanks to Tim for getting us started today. He used the phrase, you just have to hit the minimize button, and I kept thinking, geez, I sometimes think that's what some of my clients do. They, if I hit the minimize button, they'll tell me things like what they did wasn't so bad, or that they don't need treatment that much. So, okay, a little bit of a joke there. Let me just advance the slide here. What Cordelia is going to be talking about today will involve our learning about studies that examine the impact of the internet and pornography on the brain. We're going to identify at least 3 studies that show links between pornography and harmful sexual behaviors. And finally, we're going to identify at least 3 efforts to counter the harm that is involved in all of this. And so I had a chance to look at some of the participants. I know we're about to have a great time. And so, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and to Cordelia. Cordelia, welcome.
Okay, and now I've just got to see if I can go to where I can share, just like when we practiced, right?
Yes, and it might be as simple as just making your slides full screen.
Okay, are you seeing them now?
All right, I can see them.
Are you?
Yes.
Yay! Okay.
Excellent.
I like that. Thank you so much, David. Thanks to everyone at Neary and to everybody participating today. I'm excited to be able to do this, although it's always challenging to pull out a short version and try to figure out for sure what's the most beneficial to people. In reality, just going back to the first printing of the impact of pornography on children, youth, and culture in 2011, there was a lot that changed in research that is now available and in programs that are addressing this issue, and in just general attention to this and to the internet. A lot of new attention on the topic. And again, thanks to everyone at Neary for helping me to be able to have a whole update of that. An example of a very different approach to talking about pornography, I think, is John Ronson's, who is an author a lot of you may know for other topics, and he put together a 7-part Audible series, The Butterfly Effect. If any of you are interested, what he really looks at, I think, is an important piece of this, which is the issue of technology taking over the pornography industry and the result of allegedly free porn, and what this all means as he looks at the ripple effects throughout the industry of pornography. One of those major porn sites, Pornhub, which is arguably the largest one, and it actually puts out reports, at least the last 4 years. It's had its annual reports out, so you can get a lot of stats on that. And the 2016 one talked about nearly 92 billion videos were watched over the course of the 23 billion visits. And of those, that means 64 million visitors per day, or 44,000 every minute, Or another way to look at that is 4.6 billion hours of pornography watched into just 1 year, and that's one site. Also, those stats would look at that 84% of the 15 to 29-year-olds watch this daily or weekly. An average age of start is 13. You're going to see different studies that say different average age of starts. But according to the industry and the industry standards, the majority of the content is what we used to call hardcore, because yesterday's porn is today's mainstream media, and mainstream media is what we used to call soft porn. Soft porn. So the issue for us in the debate that we often do as professionals is it helpful, is it harmful, is it neutral? Is pornography just sex, which was my original training in this field? It's choices, it's freedom, it's rights, and indeed anybody who speaks out or even addresses the research that's out there is anti-sex, or perhaps only coming from a moralistic perspective. Because sex and sexual desires are perfectly normal, perfectly natural, and part of our survival in terms of our wiring for reproduction. But we're talking about an industry that has a formula. Arguably, I would start with and suggest that it doesn't support sex. It much more is interested in the industry supporting its own profit, and very often is more the exploitive use of sex. But before I come back to that, I want to talk about technology generally, because I really like when it works. Like today, it's just that relief. It's working, it's here. Hopefully you can hear me, you see the slides, and people got on to this webinar. But I want to just point to the book Jean Twing's book. That just probably a reality that all of us at some point have said, well, you just put that phone down or turn off that laptop, to ourselves, to our partners, to our kids. There's been a huge shift of technology in our lives, and now generations that have known nothing but that. iPhones since 2007, iPads since 2010, social media, and now studies kind of playing catch up and saying, so what's the effect of all of that, let alone the content that's on it? And certainly now more studies are pointing to that it affects attention span, because I can go click, 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 click. I can get to all different kinds of places. There is certainly a shift in dating and what that means and how we do it at all ages. Sexual activity, this argues that it has dropped, and different studies look at that. I think we also have to look at what kinds of sexual activity. A change in driving. People are not going out and about as much younger. They're connecting via online, how we work, how we sleep, and lack of sleep, and increases in depression, anxiety, happiness, and actually how much we get together with friends. Technology, it's not a bad thing. There's a lot of great things about it. But there are studies now that she points out looking at more screen time, less happy. And perhaps really looking at 10 hours a week or more on social media, having that 57% less happy. So the more we're on, the more there's an effect. And getting together so often is about getting together and documenting it and posting it, and that kind of just compulsion, obsession with being on and being up with what everybody's doing. Social media, YouTube has 1 billion plus users. Instagram generates 146 million likes every hour. Twitter users, 21 million tweets. Mark Zuckerman, that was August 2016, talked about the important milestone for Facebook of 1 billion people using that in a single day. Gaming is arguably one of our biggest forms of entertainment. Others would argue and look at the overlap between some gaming and pornography. But one of the points there is some of the studies there show 1 in 11 are addicted to video gaming. And others who aren't might have other kinds of issues. So it's not just that end of the continuum, but just how that plays and affects mental health, or just simply lack of physical movement or time away from relationships. And this has got the attention of the military, and Dr. Andrew Doan is one of the researchers looking at that issue and looking at military. And I'm sure, I hope some of you have had a chance to look at Zimbardo's latest book. I remember him from my early undergrad studies, where he was more known for his studies on shyness. But now it's Man Interrupted, and was really looking at achievement gaps. What's going on with our boys and men, and the shifts in achievement in work and at school. And what came to the top about that was the connection of just sheer amount of time on video games and internet porn, and how often, especially at that critical developmental time in our lives, that can affect face-to-face social skills. But again, the other problems go back to some of the things mentioned earlier with just obesity, not moving, anxiety, more challenged in workplaces, more social phobias, more aggressive behaviors, more impulsivity, more depression. He calls this not his shyness or social awkwardness alone that he used to study, but the social intensity syndrome that pairs that social awkwardness with that attention deficit that goes back to this amount of time. So it really brings up the question of what's a good thing, what's not a good thing, and how much is too much. There are different studies. There are so many studies, and I only pulled out a couple. There are more in my booklet. There are many more in some of the online references that I'll give you, but I tried to pull some more recent ones like Yarbrough and Thompson's national longitudinal study, and they were really looking at a harassment, sexual assault, coercive sex, attempted rape, and 10 to 21-year-olds. We always have to look at how they're defining perpetration and non-perpetrating behaviors versus problematic behaviors, harmful behaviors. But they looked at average age with their definitions of 15 to 16, but it varied with the type of aggression involved, and really noted that there was a strong association with the emergence of sexual violence perpetration related to prior exposure to parental spousal abuse and current exposure to pornography. This is not a study, but it was a survey of 1,000 children aged 11 to 16 in the UK. But this one comment really struck me by one of the younger interviewees, a boy, innocently asking, so trying to figure it out. He got all of his information about sex from porn, as many of our young people had, and so he was asking, if I have a girlfriend, do I need to strangle her when I have sex with her? Which is, as a mother of a son and a daughter, and someone who's fought to promote sexual health and prevent sexual harm for over 4 decades, it's so sad and so depressing to feel like we're up against something teaching very different messages than we have fought for so long. And having younger girls being told that or saying that they thought they had to have anal sex no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much they didn't want to, or they had to have sex with their partner's friends in order to show that they were true and faithful. That kind of sense of I've got to be able to take it that we're hearing from more young girls no matter how much it hurts. Another study that came up in Medical Express talked about age and experience of first exposure to pornography as it relates to masculine norms. I thought I was working on this the day that Hugh Hefner died, and all of the different kind of responses to who he was and what Playboy and what that dynasty meant. And I thought it was interesting that in that study, the older a man was when he first viewed pornography, the more likely he would want to engage in what they called Playboy behaviors. But for the younger man, the younger they were when they first viewed pornography, the more likely he was to want power over women. Age of exposure in this particular study, University of Buckingham, again, was this questionnaires online to 18 to 25-year-olds. They found age of first exposure to be 12, and that they were particularly looking at a stronger influence engaging in sexually risky behaviors, and in their case, they were looking at STIs, so sexually transmitted infections, and the higher risk there, which was true for both males and females. In another study, Scow, it was actually a doctoral dissertation in Canada, she had found that when the children, which was 1 in 3, started seeing pornography under age 10, that really had more of a effect on them wanting to try what they see and mimicking and engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. We don't have great studies across the world or even here on what are the problematic sexual behaviors, harmful sexual behaviors versus what will be called criminally sex offenses. There are different more anecdotal pieces coming up in different countries, like this one from the UK, where the police were saying that there was an 80% rise in reports of child-on-child sex offenses. Again, we'd have to look at that definition. I found this interesting, that police are receiving 2 to 3 reports every week. This was Kiwi children and teenagers posting sexually explicit images or footage of themselves online, including children as young as 6. And I just pause there because I think of how technology challenged I am, and the skill set of kids, and how we as adults at all of our different ages have to really do our work to make sure we're well versed in technology and how to use it, what it is, what it means, and where it's so natural and normal for young children and teens and young adults. A meta-analysis that's had quite a bit of attention is Wright et al.'s from 2015, because they looked at 22 studies from 7 countries and clearly said what we know, that like with all behavior, sexual aggression is caused not by its confluence of things and not any one thing, but that individuals they found in the data, looking at all the studies they did, who consume more pornography more frequently were not only more likely to hold attitudes conducive to sexual aggression, but also to engage in acts of sexual aggression compared to those who don't, or who consumed it less. So that was actually one that talked about causative. Everything is correlative, as you know, and we have lots of discussions about correlate versus causative. But I want to talk about the whole issue of the impact on the brains and developing brains, and why that is so much of a change. Even though there's hot debates about the studies, still there's a lot of them. And one of the first places that I read about this that helped me understand it was actually Malt's book, The Porn Trap, back in 2008. But they said really simply that porn stimulates the hedonistic highway, or that median forebrain, and dopamine's released when we're sexually aroused, and porn causes that to spike. And that's a dramatic increase in dopamine, which is like a drug-like high, and that porn increases other feel-good chemicals in the brain, like adrenaline, endorphins, and serotonin. The deal is, though, when there's such an overload, such a spike, porn reduces our body's own ability to produce and effectively have that same intensity under normal circumstances. So I'm going to come back to that with a few other pieces and studies, but I want to also mention the mirror cells, those things that are in our brain that make us actually have our brain circuits fire in the same way when we watch somebody doing something as if we're doing it ourselves. Let's take porn out of the picture. Let's just think about watching an intense thriller show, a car chase, and we're into it, and we find that we're sweating, we're not breathing, we're having all these physical responses, even though we weren't the one driving the car, we weren't the one in the chase, we weren't the ones being shot at. We take it in our bodies. That's our mirror cells. And that is part of the intensity when we hear something, we see something, we interact with the pornography. We're not just looking at magazine pages. We're not just looking at flat images. There's much more interaction. There's much more stimulation. Max Planck Institute of Germany has been one of the places doing more of the studies that really looked at the effect on the brain with pornography being associated both with the shrinkage in the brain's reward center, as well as an impairment in that connectivity, in that frontal judgment center, in those control areas. And that really related to hours and years of pornography use, actually correlating with that decrease in gray matter in the regions of the brain associated with reward sensitivity. So that is less dopamine, fewer dopamine receptors, that all add up to that need and want for more. There are actually, Your Brain and Pornography is one of the sites that I try to find different resources for, that actually looks at the conflicts between, or the differences of opinion between different research. Your Brain and Pornography's website has 37 different neurological studies on it, and 13 recent neuroscience literature reviews that all look at some of the links. One person I've had been on various panels with and heard speak often is neurosurgeon Dr. Don Hilton, who has also written about this, and really speaks to how the brain, this is really what we have to look at, is how the brain processes and what it perceives as reward. It is not about the nudity at all. That's not the issue here. It's that novelty. It's the click, click, more, different. I can never have that many click, clicks, more, different in my life. So this is a whole different thing. And then just imagine all of that coming at us at younger and younger ages with that ease of access and no way to make meaning of that, and having that perhaps fill up my brain, my mind, my body, my sensations, my senses before I ever interact even with a kiss with another human being. So there's also, we know that the brain is malleable. We know the Nobel laureate research about supranormal stimulus, meaning supranormal stimulus, that we are attracted to the bigger, brighter, shinier objects. That just goes beyond our logic, rational minds. We go there, and certainly that pornography brings us that bigger, brighter, shinier objects with that emotional disconnection. That's that visual pheromone effect and the mirror cells going on. That is why there is many more arguing about the biological addiction. Another issue is, if you're interested in this intersection with sex trafficking and pornography, Meg Johnson has an interesting TED Talks on just the reality of the porn culture. But a couple points I found particularly thought-provoking is how in the U.S. sex is a legal act with consequences in many different ways, and selling and buying sex is generally illegal unless that is filmed and distributed online. And then it's not only legal, it's very much culturally celebrated, encouraged, expected, protected. And it is the, and we know there's an overlap in terms of sex trafficking, in terms of creating a desire to buy, to do, to have what I've watched on screen, or to need pornography when I am prostituting someone. We know that when we look at a lot of the different issues with harmful sexual behaviors or problematic sexual behavior problems, I'm sure many of you know Dr. John Briere and trauma research over the years, but one of the things he talks about is how toxic decisions seem rational in a toxic environment. And it's why I've mentioned, although in this amount of time, not as much as I would like, the reality of a pornified culture where the normalization of harm is so common that just questioning it means there's something wrong with you. What's wrong with you that you don't accept this? This is normal, because it is normative now. And so a lot of the behaviors make sense in that kind of pornified, toxic environment. As the Institute of Medicine said back in 2006, it's not even reasonable to think that people are going to change their behavior, at least easily, when there's so much in our society, culture, and physical environments working against that change. So pornography is telling us a whole lot about how we should think, how we should feel, what we should act, and what we should be aroused by. The language alone, and this is very, very, very tame, has quickly become mainstream. MILF's very mainstream. Mothers I would like to fornicate with, I guess would be the way to say it for this webinar. The money shot's getting to the point where we have young kids who've never had sex with a human being thinking that one of the things they want is to have somebody, or are expected to deal with, is somebody coming all over their face, in their eyes, a kind of debasing expectation or reaction. Shaved pubic hair, originally from porn, very mainstream, very norm. We're supposed to look like we're prepubescent as women. Oral sex being so last decade, it's much more gagging and rough anal, and many of the same kind of cisgender heteronormative pieces coming into the gay pornography, lesbian pornography particularly, being more done for the male gaze. And something we could talk a lot more about and should talk a lot more about with all the issues about race and privilege in our culture right now is the racist stereotypes and norms that are part of pornography. But a key to this discussion today is what happens when pain is so equated with pleasure, and that inflicting pain and degrading the other person is all fused with what is sex. Some of this came up in Peggy Orenstein's interviews with her book, Girls and Sex. And one of the things the girls talked about was needing to compete with porn stars and how emotionally disconnected they felt with their bodies, and that they can expect sex to hurt and that they shouldn't say anything. Again, I go back to how hard we have worked to understand and talk to youth for so long, all ages, about the importance of knowing our own bodies, of understanding pleasure, of being able to communicate what we want and what we don't want. It's sad, sad to hear our loss of ground in this way, and also to think about how much that sounds like victimization, that dissociation, again, learning to take it. There's an impact on relationships. People are preferring pixels to people. You know, the pixels don't talk back, the pixels don't have needs, the pixels don't have demands. There's a word, I hadn't heard it before, you probably all have, phubbing, which means I'm getting snubbed by somebody on their phone. We're too busy looking at our phones to actually talk to each other. And it's no big surprise the social anxiety links to that, because that time on screen means away from social emotional learning, social emotional connections. One of the things, though, getting the most attention from lots of males is that they were told that porn's normal, it's helpful, it's a sexual aid, it's harmless, and yet many consumers started having porn-induced erectile dysfunction at all different ages, and what finding that actually when they went to doctors who were informed by this, they could sort through what might be from other causes versus what might be a result of their pornography consumption, and needing to disconnect, to reboot. So that, and the connections didn't come from professionals as much as, although there are various people studying this, that as they did from men finding each other online and connecting and finding those sources and those supports. I get very concerned about criminal justice only responses for that, all of this, because we can't arrest or prosecute our way out. We don't want to only look at responses after somebody develops mentally or physically unhealthy behaviors, or behaviors that harm themselves or harm others. Public health is really what we do as a society to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy. So with a pornified culture, with ease of access, getting to us more and more and more ways, and this is just the barely beginning of even more experiential technology, what does it mean to have so much access at such a young age to primarily hardcore content without messages to counter that, without ability to even make meaning of that at younger ages, without the same emphasis on social emotional learning and human connection? We know change is possible. We saw a lot of these parallels with tobacco. When it was so part of our culture, doctors recommended it, used it to counter anxiety. It was perfectly normal. It was sexy. I want to grow up and do this. It was everywhere, very much like pornography is now. We learned it couldn't just be individual. There was a secondhand effect. There are studies that show pornography has a secondhand effect. And it's because I may not be watching it, I may not be using it, but if all of my friends are, and they're using the language and they have the expectations, and everybody I date has that expectation, that pressure is on in a big way, and I'm going to learn a lot of the same messages. You know, one of the things that they did with smoking is came to the spot of saying, you know, this is harmful to your health. We've got to admit that. Not everybody gets sick at the same rate. Not everybody gets sick at all. Some people start, some people stop, some people have a very hard time stopping there, and we know that there's a link and problem from that secondhand piece. So there's parallels. They also did a truth campaign. Remember that this was an issue of how important it was to kind of take what was sold to us as truth about how sexy and normative and hip and cool this was, and really speak to the harmful health effects. Again, not everyone, not at the same time, not in the same way, but that norm of expectation being challenged. And this is not about shaming, because we don't need more shaming around our sex and sexuality and what we're aroused by, but it is challenging industry standards and norms. There are some interesting projects taking this on and challenging it in different ways. One of them, I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Menace Peacemakers is a Minnesota-based project that started a Don't Buy It project, and they really wanted to reach out to men and look at the intersections with all sexually aggressive behavior, between sexual violence, buying sex, or prostituting someone, and use of pornography. And they talk about the intersections, and they talk about the fact that women are not products. People are not products. Men are more than consumers, and invite men to join the movement and join the conversation, to just start actually taking action, to open our eyes to many of the things that we have been told over and over and over from very young ages are helpful, or expected behaviors, this kind of hypermasculinity that can be harmful to the health, and not to buy it, not to buy other human beings, not to buy into this that may be, again, harmful to your health, harmful to your sexual functioning, harmful to your relationships, and to become an effective ally, to be able to speak up and out and against this. And another example I think is interesting really goes to youth, because especially youth who have only been raised in this technology age, they haven't seen anything other, they haven't had comprehensive sexuality information, that kind of stuff we do censor. We do censor the positive messages and images, and we sell and we market pornography without much discussion of it in the minimal sex education they may be getting. So one of the things that Fight the New Drug has taken on is really ways to mobilize young people, and their messages really focus on not the different political analyses around pornography at all. They focus more on on the effects on the brain. They focus more on the importance of fighting for love, of looking at the industry standards, of looking at the research. They also quickly learned that they needed to, they developed an online treatment program for children and youth because they didn't know where to go, and they were concerned about how this was affecting them. The Fortify program, just between February 2014 and September 2016, this online treatment program, over 35,000 youth. It was geared for youth, but adults kept coming into it, as you can see, as well. 87% were male, 13% were female, because of course girls are catching up in use of pornography and exposure to pornography, although it's still dominantly male. And what the people that went to their Fortify program, 75% viewed their first porn between ages of 9 and 13. And they really saw the intersection between depression and anxiety, so the program is really focused on how it addresses not only the pornography consumption and what the effects are, but also in a supportive way that they can start to replace that with other things, and also reach out to caring adults in their lives. Going back to Fight the New Drug, that's affiliated with that, but the educational program, what they have found to be most effective with young people is that rebellion card, to help them rebel against the industry that is manipulating them. And they are changing their language about pornography with a drug, as a drug that's messing with their lives, but still looking at this cultural expectation and the impact on their health. I'm sure many in this audience are familiar with Thorn Deterrence Project, and I'm going to bring up child pornography, or as it is more referred to around the world as child sexual abuse images, child sexual exploitive material. It is a difference in our laws here is pornography is legal, the child sexual abuse images are not, and they were trying to reach people who were searching for pornography. There's a lot of we need more understanding of how many people look at pornography generally, and given teen is one of the number 1, 2, or 3, it varies, goes back and forth, types of pornography searched for anywhere in the world at any given time. The mainstream pornography clearly has a lot of reference to underage people, to sexually abusive, to incestuous relationships, to et cetera, as part of the norm, as part of the arousal shaping. But and technically isn't supposed to have images of those under 18 on it. But with these images, what they've learned with people searching. So we don't know how many people are looking at the general pornography, they need and want more novelty, and they then go to child pornography versus that's all they were specifically interested in, or how many became, saw some images, were disgusted at first, then got more intrigued, wanted more, and suddenly that disgust was an arousal or not as disgusting. But one of the things Thorn Deterrence Project has learned is that the, hey, wait a minute, if I can find you, so can law enforcement, or more shaming or threatening, didn't work as well to get people to seek help who were looking at these images. What worked more was empathy and saying, look, if you're sexually attracted to children, there are understanding people who can help you, and they're getting them into the Stop It Now helpline. They're getting them, helping them get to ATSA resources. Certainly drawing attention to, you may think this is normal, you may think this is not harmful, but you need to understand that this is indeed a serious crime and that there is an effect on others from doing this. Another resource, because there's overlap between the self or pure exploitation, the sexting, and pornography, because there's other studies I didn't have in the screen that show a link between pornography consumption and the amount I am going to be okay with sexting or be expecting the sexting. So an interesting program for that, I think, is at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection on Self and Pure Exploitation. They also did a very needed study on adult survivors of child sexual abuse images and looking at the very, very long-term effects and complex reality of that type of victimization. There's some really interesting policy things going on. I'm sure you've heard the debates, pros, cons, between what the UK tried to do with digital filters, meaning instead of pornography automatically being on all my technology and all of my media, I would have the opportunity, if I wanted it, to opt in instead of having to opt out. That seemed like it made sense, but obviously those profiting from that were very concerned about that. And there's although there are more companies that are looking at some of those practices themselves, there are certainly, even among the mainstream porn companies, a willingness, in part because I think of the mounting research, to look at age verification and age verification technology. The UK, again, was a leader there in trying to push for that because there have been technology breakthroughs that make that more meaningful than simply checking a yes, I'm this age box. There are other groups like the National Center. Yes?
Oh, sorry, Cordelia. I was just going to do a quick time check and say it'd be great if we could turn it over to Q&A in the next 2 minutes to up to 7 minutes.
Right? Okay, I was thinking I had till 1:45, but I'll be there. I'll be done at 1:45.
Yeah, somewhere right in there. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So there's another group, the National Center on Child Exploitation. If those of you are interested in groups that are doing action on policy, they're also another group like that is collecting research. They're also targeting companies that are mainstream companies that are profiting from pornography. But I just want to end with, to me, part of this is that this is really a challenge, and how do we take back our sexuality from a pornography industry, that this is all about profit, not about our health and well-being, and not allowing the sex sells excuse to silence us or to sell out. And how much just saying that, gee, if you're concerned at all about pornography or the harms of pornography, or even citing that research that you must be anti-sex, which is very much minimizing any of that impact. I just want to end before we do questions with, yeah, sex is, and sexual desire and sexuality are a natural, normal part of human behavior. We're all sexual beings from birth to death. The porn industry uses a formula for profit. And it's not about helping sex, it's about helping its profit. I believe it's exploitive use of sex. The largest sex organ's not between our legs, it's between our ears, and that's where porn hits us the most. One of the things it robs us of is not only the effects on the brain, but of our imagination. It's hard for people to even imagine sex that's not pornified, or what it means to be sexy in a not pornified way. And we need to remember the power, the protective factor of caring connections, of being able to connect with another human being, of being able to look them in the eyes, to understand all the different ways to be intimate, and the power of love to be able to fight a very disconnected, empty type of sex being sold to us as perfectly normal. So we can go with that to the questions, David.
All right, thanks so much, Cordelia. That was fabulous. And I'm assuming that Tim is going to, make me the presenter. Here I am showing my screen. If Cordelia can turn on her webcam, so can I. So very good. Cordelia, we got a lot of questions. If I could, I'm just going to pontificate for one moment and say that as I was going through all of these questions, I was really saddened. I'm not sure we've gotten a question yet from a man. And I'm sort of still percolating and processing that in my own mind, since within pornography, there's not just a question about the objectification of women, but also the objectification of men as well. And it just makes me think, in an era where I waste too much time on Facebook and I read all of the Me Too posts that have been coming up in the wake of Harvey Weinstein, including from people very, very close to me, relatives and so on, that there's a real discussion in here about men's role in preventing abuse, in bearing witness to abuse, but also in terms of what does and doesn't constitute healthy masculinity, recognizing that it's not going to be the same thing for everybody. So I don't know if there's anything I said that was worthy of comment, but it's just something that I see here.
That's one of the reasons I mentioned the Don't Buy It project. I think there's, and the porn-induced erectile dysfunction, and the amount of men just saying, you know, this is we need more men to talk about this, and more men are talking about the impact, and there's many more wonderful videos on men who say, of course I consumed a lot of pornography, but now I'm thinking about that differently, and I'm looking at what I want in a relationship, and how this is not what I want to be aroused by, or what it's helping me have the kind of relationship that I want to have.
Sure. Yeah. Nice. Excellent. So I'm going to turn it over to questions that have come in very early. You might have touched on this, but very early in the webinar, Robin asked a great question, simply saying, "Can we talk a little bit about sex positivity as well? BDSM behaviors are not implicitly unhealthy or harmful. Neither is anal sex." Any further thoughts in addition to what you've said?
Yeah, actually I had BDSM on the bottom of the slide and didn't have time in my little time to go into the difference between people negotiating and having very clear communication and setting very clear limits and all of these different pieces that they might negotiate, which is, by the way, not 50 Shades of Grey, and this issue of where the idea that the only way you can get any pleasure is through pain, and what you want, what you need, what you consider to be pleasure is irrelevant. That's the concern more with the pornified version of that, is that it's not about what you need. It's not about, in fact, one of the studies shows that it's not about that an optional anal sex that feels good for you, but that it's rough, that it's brutal, that it's body altering, and that the pain, your pain, is part of my pleasure, and your pain is not part of yours.
Sure. Yes. Nice, thank you. And another piece of your slides that unfortunately you had to skip over, I guess I might as well ask you because you're the presenter. Had a couple of questions is, I'm sorry, but what does ATM stand for? Would you like to discuss that?
Ass to mouth, yes. So that would be where the penis is put in anal and then pulled out and stuck in the woman's mouth. So it's all about debasement, which is what so much of the image, actual actions are.
Yeah, and in fact seems to, I think, has become more prevalent across a lot of forms of pornography. If I could mention, you started off with the Pornhub statistics, and I really would encourage people to do a Google search, obviously using in private browsing and not on your agency-issued laptop. But the Pornhub statistics really are a little bit like entering a new world. They're highly informative and really something to see. It's not as simple as just going to the porn site and looking for them. You have to Google search them, but the numbers are dramatic. Lois asks a great question, which is, can you say a bit about sexting in teens?
Yes, again, it makes perfect sense a lot. I went by that really quickly too, but the fact that that we have the technology in our hands, plenty of adults I know are saying, boy, I'm glad that I didn't have this technology, because we know our prefrontal cortexes are still under development into our mid-20s. We know that there's impulse issues, that we get aroused, that we are interested. We know that girls, just with our brain and hormonal development, are more dominantly interested in relationships, and the R is big, the physical is bigger in boys, although we both have both. So that if I'm interested in a boy and he wants a picture and that's how I show love, you know, that pressure feels a lot more powerful than anything I may know about that image possibly getting out there. Plus, if people are telling me, hey, you should be okay with your body, there's nothing wrong with your body, don't be ashamed, take a picture, send it to me. All of those play into things that later, when somebody goes, what were you thinking? Did you trust that this person wasn't going to show it to other people when you broke up, or even before, or that there weren't other people watching it? It's like, in a pornified culture with technology in our hands that expects everything to be photographed, that has mixed that up with what love is all about, turning us into commodities, it makes sense.
A whole new era of informed consent, the way that you just described it. Cassandra also has a great question, which is, how do you promote this message without being referred to as a prude, or being referred to as a woman who was just offended by porn?
Well, first of all, we need more men talking about this. It shouldn't be only women. You know, think of how many years in sexual violence, like you said, it was women. Sexual harassment, it was women talking about it, that this is harming men and women. And I think the fact that there are so many more men, including men who have really struggled with porn-induced erectile dysfunction, speaking very publicly about this, I think that's really important, because it's people saying, look, I want to promote, I want all about promoting sexual health and positive sexuality and taking back our sexuality. I like sex, and I think porn is messing with that. And I work really hard. I've worked really hard for decades, as many of us have, to promote the healthy and prevent the harmful, and it ticks me off that so quickly this industry is being able to counter with messages and reaching our children at younger and younger ages, while we are being censored from really good comprehensive sexuality information and images.
Excellent, Cordelia. Thank you. And again, I'm just going to keep going down this this list of questions, as well as many others that I thought up along the way. I will say, just as a footnote to that, maybe somewhat of a humorous footnote to that, Cordelia and I emailed back and forth in a little bit in preparation for this, and I said, so what kinds of questions do you typically get? And Cordelia's humorous answer, to see if I was still reading her email, was, can you like sex and not like porn? Which I thought was a little humorous. I just had to throw that in there. So there was also a question about a source for the slides. Perhaps Tim can answer that at the ending. If you sort of play with your control panel on the right side of your screen, there is a link to the slides. I actually downloaded it myself while Cordelia was talking. Another one comes from Sarah out in Colorado. Hi, Sarah. When you were asked about what is healthy versus unhealthy regarding pornography, how have you answered? This here's a subject we could talk about all day.
A long time. Well, to me, the difference is, again, I think the pornography industry has really usurped the term erotica. You know, I used to talk about, in fact, at sexual assault conferences in the 80s, is it erotica or is it pornography? Like, what do we think of as a healthy image that isn't pornified? And for me, part of that is the degradation, the debasement, the depiction of actually what we would call in many cases criminal sexual acts. We recognize child pornography, child sexual abuse images as documentation of sexual abuse. In many cases in pornography, you're seeing acts that somebody is literally being body altered, with what's happening to their body, the gag oral, the Then now it used to be that even though I was doing something violent to you or sexually really aggressive, you had to go, oh baby, give me more, I like it, I like it, I like it. Now the shift is, it's the mascara running, it's the pain, it's the seeing you gag, seeing you throw up, seeing you bleed, seeing you wasted afterwards, not in that pleasurable, luscious wasted after it, but in a I have been so violated and so exploited, I can't breathe, I can't move way. And so it's really challenging to come back and go, and if that's all I've seen, and I can't even come up with an image of what's healthy sexuality because all I've seen are pornified images, we have work to do to bring back to bring back our senses, to bring back sexuality. I mean, in the 70s, when I had no business treating prostituted women because I didn't know anything, I was young, I was naive, and we didn't say prostituted women then. But I remember then having them say, you know, I don't kiss, that's too intimate. And I think now, what don't you see in pornography? You don't see kissing. You don't see looking into somebody's eye. I'm not just talking here about vanilla sex. We can be creative, we can be exciting, we can be all of that. But at some point, there's a human connection. Not just where I'm coming all over your face or defecating on you or causing you great pain or turning your face around because I don't even want to have contact with you. I just want to penetrate every orifice I can.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, yeah, there is something to be said for candlelit dinners and long walks in the rain. Thank you very much, Cordelia. And I'm noticing, thank you, I'm seeing the questions coming in from the guys now. So Joe asks, are there studies that indicate that over time an individual would want the pornography materials to be increasingly explicit? I'm unaware of these studies. Cordelia, interested in?
I think the main thing is that what we know is the issue is the novelty, not the nudity, you know, that it's novelty. And the difference between what used to be, you know, a magazine, and even if I had a huge stash of magazines, it was a certain kind of image, you know, whereas now if I click on a site, I'm going to see multiple videos right away, you know, so just think about being a 10-year-old and I'm looking for butts and breasts or boobs, and all of a sudden I've got all these acts I had no intention of quite getting into, and now they're there, the image is there. You know, so I think that part of that issue is just that there is so much, and there's so much of this very, the kind of imagery and the kind of hardcore that is the gonzo porn that is dominant in the industry. So you might be looking for more novelty, but what is getting more attention is the kind of shock value of more.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. This is a very helpful answer. Many have observed that for all the people that said they escalated into, for example, child sexual abuse images, there's many others, there's many more who don't escalate and perhaps simply sort of go in a sideways direction. From what I understand in a lot of research, overall sexual interests actually don't change a great deal. As much across the lifespan. Somebody else, an interesting comment from Chuck, thank you Chuck, that the difference is how we are objectified, men as objects of power, women as objects for men's pleasure. And yes, couldn't you just write several journal articles?
Is that Chuck Berry? That sounds like Chuck Berry, yes.
Well done. Not that we out anybody here, but well done. So very quickly, I think we got time for one more. Where does the Catholic Church weigh in on pornography? And how can clergy be helpful advocates for this cause? Thank you, Ryan, for asking this one.
Actually, some of the early requests I had for training on this were with different Catholic churches. And this was not only an issue of faith leadership, but of so many people coming in and saying, I have a problem, I have help, or this is affecting my relationship, or I'm worried about my child, or I'm worried about my husband, I'm worried about my wife, so it's affecting my family. And of course, they didn't know how to talk about it or have the you know, it's been a big shift in research. You know, if you look at the difference in what the research is this last decade, with technology, again, with the change in the content, the change in the reach, the multiplicity of stimulations and access that has come with technology, I think they were some of the early people asking about what they could do, and what they could do is a lot. But I mean, also, I would hope that's also talking about healthy sexuality. It's also encouraging, instead of just you shouldn't be looking at it, you shouldn't. I was raised Catholic, so it was you shouldn't be thinking about it, and of course that made me think about it all the time. I was told you shouldn't go to a place with white tablecloths because it'll make the guy think of bed sheets and he'll get aroused and won't be able to control himself. And the effect was, I really like white tablecloths. So I don't think it's going to help us, do the don't think, don't talk, don't ask thing. But I think that just the reality that we are up against this major educator, and as adults, we have been sexually negligent by not learning what we can about it in terms of what the research is saying, the range of research is saying impact is, and talking about it and recognizing that accidental exposure is very, very easy, and then that draw in is very strong.
Yeah, excellent. And so I'm seeing numerous other questions coming in that we won't be able to get to. I'm thinking that perhaps one thing we might try to do is to collect some of these and see if we can follow up with some kind of an email. I think we knew this was going to happen, that that there would be all kinds of questions coming in. I'm also seeing lots of, I really appreciate the information, great webinar, et cetera, et cetera. And so, Cordelia, you were one of those where the people that benefit from your work will never know to thank you, because they won't have been on the webinar, they won't have been abused. So I think we all are thanking you for your excellent efforts at this point. Please don't sign off just yet. I just want to mention that Cordelia's booklet, it's a really great booklet, and it is really inexpensive, and it's available from the bookstore at nearypress.org. Hope that you can all have a look at that. There are limited paid CEUs that are available for the CE webinars, and I'm putting up Kristen's email address that you can contact her at, klobish@neary.com, or Klobish, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And just want to also add that we have a number of different sponsors that we definitely want to thank. You can become a sponsor yourself. Let me see if they're in there. Yeah, I just wanted to put up their names. Here's some folks that many of us know quite well, either through NEARY circles or MASOC circles or ATSA circles or heavens knows where else. These are the folks that make these webinars really click. So thank you to the sponsors, and also just want to mention you can be one too. I keep thinking I need to become one as well. One of these days, Kristen and Elisa, really soon you'll see my name on there as well. And so with that, I am going to say I believe it's just about time for us to sign off. Thank you to everybody that logged in. We had fantastic participation today. And Cordelia, I hope and trust that it's okay for folks to contact you either directly or through NEARY Press. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thanks for coming on board, and thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.